I remember there coming a point where I was doing just a lot of like deeper training and research, and I got to a point where I'm like, I can't, like I'm getting headaches, I'm tired, and I'm like, man, like I thought that I was avoiding work, and instead it was no, this is too much.
Yeah.
This is just too much. I'm like, and I had to think, I'm like, okay, when I finish all of this, what do I get? Like, what's the point of all of this? What does it give me? Like, oh, well then like I have that sense of peace. I'll feel a sense of freedom. I can actually choose what I do and do not want to do. I can do really creative things. I'm like, great, why don't I do those? Now.
Welcome back to the Mind Change Podcast. We have McKenzie Brewster with us again.
I don't know where we're looking.
I don't know either.
Okay.
Whatever. Just, we'll look at each other.
Okay.
McKenzie is a mind change practitioner and will be a frequent co-host here on the podcast. So welcome back.
Thank you.
And just a quick reminder, please like, subscribe, download.
Yeah.
All the things that I have never actually done when someone says to do it, but I now know the importance and humbly ask that you do the things that I have not done, but now I will begin doing because I understand that it matters and it's what helps us create more free content for everybody else.
That's what allows us to do this.
Yes, so please do that. We're pausing for you to go ahead right now. No, I'm just kidding. Whatever. Okay, so today we're going to talk about when the work becomes work, right? And we get too focused in on the heavy of it and right? Like oh, this feels like a lot. And I think that this is what we can sometimes refer to as like personal development burnout.
Yes.
Right? Like it becomes something where you get so excited in the beginning and you're doing these things and you see all these changes and these wonderful things transforming in your life and you keep going and you keep approaching it in the same way. And then you hit these kind of plateaus or you dip down and you get a bit of a valley or you feel a little burned out. Mm-hmm. And this is where oftentimes people start to get the idea that it's stopped working, or if they're really nice and creative, like they retroactively take away and they're like, this actually doesn't work. It never worked. Maybe it never really worked. Maybe I need to find something else. Yeah. And I think this is one of the key reasons that people therapy hop or modality hop so often, even if they've had amazing changes from the modality that they're working with, it ends up being something that they burn out on.
Yeah.
Have you seen that?
Yes, I have. I've experienced that too. And that's part of why I was really happy that you wanted to talk about this. Yeah, I think that it then I can see this sort of cycle happen where it's almost like a perpetual healing sort of thing. Totally. Or just not wanting to engage with it at all. And it almost seems like an unnecessary form of discouragement. And I think it starts to play with like, what are we actually doing here? Like, what's the point of all of this?
Yes. Yes. I can tell you I went through this majorly in my life, but luckily had enough of a relationship with what I was doing to take a step back and go, what's the real problem here? Yeah. I had done, you guys know my story, lots of changes, right? Profound changes, transforming in health and emotions and spirit and all these different ways. And then thought, this is amazing and more must be more. Yes. Like, more must mean I will get more changes. Yes. And I really hardcore, I remember for me, what I did was I set up an hour of self-work every day. This was still in the relatively first year of my, kind of my journey with this. And so set up this thing, and I would set a timer, and I would actually do it in the sauna, sort of. I love to multitask, even though I know it's not a real thing, but the more I can get done at once. So would sit in the sauna, would set my timer, and would go to do the self-work. And I would promptly fall asleep. And then would wake up right before the timer went off. And I was so frustrated with myself.
Yeah.
And I felt like I was broken and that I was like not doing it right. Which is a lovely program that was deeply rooted in me for a long time. So I just struggled with that and thought, okay, well, I must be doing something wrong. Maybe this isn't working anymore.
Yeah.
Maybe your mind starts going, right? Like I started making up stories.
Yes.
Ooh, there must be something too big. Like, oh, this is resistance. There must be something really big in there.
Yeah.
That I'm not willing to see, or that's too hard, right? Oh my heavens, was I setting myself up for, big stories there. So after that was about like a couple weeks that was going on, and I did all the fun self-judgment and all the broken program and all the like, I need to do it right, and beat myself up in order to try to correct that behavior. I tried another approach.
Which was,
what if I'm doing this for a really good reason?
Yeah.
What might that really good reason be? And when that question had actual space to be asked and to come up.
And it sounds like it's a little bit different than what you were saying before of there must be a really good reason I'm doing this. Where before it seemed like it was kind of like loaded into there's something really big, there's something really terrible. As opposed to like, oh, maybe there's a really helpful function to this.
Yes. That thing that I speak all the time and said that I knew is that my body is for me.
Right.
And yet when it's falling asleep, when I go to do the work, I'm thinking there's something wrong, that it's broken. And the truth was, no, I wasn't. My body was still for me, as it always is.
Yeah.
And so I just took a bit of a step back and asked myself that question and framed it from what's the best possible message that this has, my body has for me in doing this? And so with that space, it kind of came up that this was starting to feel like a lot of work.
Yeah.
And I kind of was a little bit over digging into all this past stuff and all these traumatic memories and going like spelunking in the trauma.
Yes.
And I was realizing that I needed to focus on some of the other tools. And I will say this is how the GPS and the manifesto and the smiles kind of, in the GPS really became, okay, this is something more I need to focus on. Yeah. And I started to see that, okay, that's the work too. And quite possibly the more important work. Yeah. So then I realized, what was the purpose of me healing all of this stuff in the first place?
Right.
What's the big victory of getting out of the chronic illness?
Yeah.
If all I'm really doing now is spending an hour a day dissecting my past and my history and my trauma, and really wasn't doing much more than that. And I realized, like, I've come so far. I need to enjoy this.
Right.
Like, I did this to spend time with my family, to be there for my children.
Yeah.
And I realized the way I was approaching the self-work was just continuing to deep dive me into the stuff that really did need to be addressed in the beginning.
Yeah.
But didn't need that same amount of focus in the long run.
Yeah, I've experienced similar. It was funny. A couple months ago, a friend of mine kind of called me out on it. We have a lot of these kinds of conversations. So she'll come at me now from time to time where I'm like, I'll just want to vent about something. She'll be like, well, how do you know? And I'm like, oh. so grateful and really frustrated in this particular moment. But she just had been sharing with me. She's like, look, I think it's really great that you have all these tools and that you have learned how to process. She's like, but what are you building? Like, what are you moving towards? Because it seems like you just kind of like are getting a little bit stuck and going in and trying to dig, like what's driving you forward. And I think about how so much of the time, it's so much easier to let go of something when you know what you're getting. Like, what are we moving into? And it can become its own sort of habit or pattern. Or there are times where I thought that I was doing the work, right? But what I actually was doing was just sort of like dwelling in it and spinning in it. And there can be a little bit of I don't know, sometimes I think even like our language around the work, right? Like this sort of like merit, like there's more of an importance to it, as opposed to how much responsibility we have to care for ourselves and the things that bring us joy and the ways that help us feel fulfilled and satisfied so that we really are present. I mean, the amount of times when I'm working with someone and, they're getting to a place in a memory where like, what is it that they really, needed underneath everything? Like, what did they want to see in their parent, so to speak? And it was like, I wish they would have just like, that they had just been able to like really rest. Or if I had seen them like doing something that they really enjoyed or really loved, I'm like, oh, wow, like that. They see that when they heal. And when they've worked through something too, one of the most automatic responses is that people go and play. Even in their memories, it's like, oh yeah, I just want to go and play. I'm like, oh, yes. That's part of the antidote. That's what's needed. Like the more you do that, yes, we need to deal with the stuff underneath that's driving us, but that when we practice that more, and that's what we're handing down to the next generation, when we're signaling to one another that it's safe to play, I think that has a really profound impact.
It's so true. And it makes me wonder and reflect, how well are we doing this?
Yeah.
If play isn't actually showing up more in our day-to-day life.
Yeah.
Because one of the tenets of mind change is that we're going back. Part of the reason we go back in memory, and the past is not actually the past.
Right.
It's just, it's just the reference point. We use that to build what we call our present and our future. So it's all really present.
Right.
It's just all the present, but we source it in this way. And if we go back to give skill, to say, oh, at that time I didn't know, but I can know now. And then you put that skill there when it's not really that we're really just unlayering because it's already there for them.
Oh, can you, like when you say unlayer, what does that mean?
It is my belief system.
Okay.
That we all come into this world really pure, really beautiful, really tuned in to so many things, right? Babies are so much more attuned to smells and what they hear and the vibration and the energetic vibration of a mother and of the room, really, right? Babies are these live wires.
Yeah.
And children as well. And I believe over time what happens is we get trained out of that. We get trained out of these super senses that go beyond just the words that we speak or the look on our face, right? So much of the nonverbal communication is lost. So much of the energetic awareness is lost. Yeah. Children are just in it, right? They know. You ask them and they just have these big answers and they've considered all these things. And, well, I just know because it's in my body. They trust that until they're taught not to. And so I think that that's the thing we're talking about is generally when we go back into a memory and let's say it's something where they needed to play and that child had become overly responsible. It's very common, right? In traumatic situations, children get the idea and the message that the adults are a little bit lost at sea and they feel the need to be overly responsible to help caretake an adult in their life.
Yeah, so that they can get the care that they need too.
Yes. And so in doing that, they become open to what adults think about and worry about, which their little brains and bodies just are not just not ready for,
Yeah.
right? I don't think adults are ready for it, frankly, but we do it. And so if you uncover that, unlayer that, take away the responsibility because it was never theirs to carry in the first place.
Yeah.
That's that unlayering. So you remove that layer. Right underneath of that is play. Is creativity.
It just shows up over and over again. Yeah. Anytime I'm doing like self-work or I'm with a client. Yeah. I see that happen.
Adult children's perception of their parents when they're going back. And they've got this rock solid idea that dad was this like staunch, grump or, super serious and probably never played in his entire life.
Yeah.
Never took anything but, things serious.
Yeah.
We start to uncover and unlayer and do the work in this.
Yeah.
And dad all of a sudden wants to play.
Yeah.
That for adult children is just mind blowing. Yeah. You want to talk about a complete neural rewrite in the mind. Watching their dad play, watching their dad just smile, relax, maybe even laugh. Is it true that they never saw that? It's probably not.
Yeah.
Even though they may be like, I have absolutely no memory of that. They're not really making it up when we find these things. They probably did catch a glimpse of it somewhere. It was maybe very rare, granted, but they saw it somewhere. And if nothing else, energetically, they knew it was there. And that's sort of what I think makes kids so sad, is if they are witnessing a parent who is so far removed from their inner child,
who they're meant to connect with, and it's innate, and they just have that innate knowing that that's what we're meant for.
Mourn for that, and they I think it tends to have them let go of their childhood sooner than needed. So that's what I say. It's not that we go back and we're like putting things in.
Right.
People get a little bit worried considering that we have access to the subconscious mind in the work that we do.
Yeah.
And that we may be going in and somehow brainwashing or programming things that they don't want in there. We really maintain complete respect and honor and use what the person has said that they want.
Right. We're using their words and everything's informed by what they want, but also it's all of the resources that they already have. I think it's such a natural process once you know how to engage with it.
Yes.
And because their desire is so innate within us, is so natural, that once there's just that little bit of opening that it's safe, we move right into it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it surprises people, right? We've both experienced it. We now work with so many clients. They just come in thinking there is no way. There's no way. Like if we even would say, well, what if dad could play?
Yes. There's a lot of like major resistance or like completely outside of their conception.
It doesn't seem, within their realm of even comprehension, even imagination.
Yeah.
And then
15
minutes later, they're playing with dad on the floor or in the grass or something like that. And it's just mind-blowing to them. And it's the beauty of what we keep calling the work. And I know that's actually really common now to hear in self-help or personal development modalities.
Yeah, that's part of why I wanted to bring this into you, because I was just noticing how much, and there's almost at times like a little bit of a self-importance that we can have, like the work. I'm like, what are we talking about when we say that? But also, I think there's a part of it that I really appreciate when people, to help set people's expectations, like a context for the level of agitation that can happen that's necessary for neuroplasticity.
Sure.
Like you're rising through different autonomic states, the amount of change, because we're more oriented to do what's efficient. So that's often what we've already been doing, what we know. So it can be effortful to do something different. It takes more resources, more metabolic resources. And so like in that regard, it is work. But there have been other things that have shown that we learn far more through play in a lot of ways. Like, I mean, I think about when I am just in the gym by myself, no music, and I'm lifting weights. It's like, that's one experience. When I am with a friend on a hike, I'm seeing something beautiful, I'm doing a lot more work, but I'm like physically, it's more effortful. But because I have all these other things that make it so much more enjoyable, it doesn't really feel like nearly as much work. And the learning happens a lot faster.
Yes.
Yeah.
I do think also,
Yeah.
we know the importance of word association and language, right? One of the big things that we utilize within the mind change method is NLP informed, context. I think as a society, we have a very unhealthy relationship with the word work.
Yeah.
Most people at least seem unhappy with what they call work, right? What do you do for work? What do you do? And there's this idea that it is a large degree of sacrifice and effort, obligation for very little payoff.
Yeah.
And it's this like unfair exchange. So many people, I think, have that frame around work, the word work.
Yeah.
So we had talked about, we've noticed this. We have a wonderful and thriving student community in the mind change from our online courses. So we hear a lot of banter back and forth between the students. And I can hear this a little bit in the self-work when it's meant, and this is a huge part of the mind change method and why I think it's sustainable and why it's responsible.
Yeah.
Because self-work, self-agency, self-ability, responsibility, even that word, so many people have, it's triggery responsibility.
Negative attachment to it.
So, we talk about it a lot,
right?
But it's such a big part of what we do because it helps people understand they're not outsourcing to us, like as the creator of or a practitioner of.
Right.
It's really important.
Even the modality itself, I think that's part of the work. It's like I have to do this thing so that I'm okay. Again, there's this underlying idea that I need something else and not in a, hey, we're made for connection kind of way.
Yes.
Right. But there's something missing. There's something wrong with me. I'm looking there's some sort of value in the work that I do or anyway.
Right. Continue. So we playfully talked about what would we call it other than work, right? Just to try to help people understand. And then we came up with self-play.
Well,
and then my husband Kent was like, we're going to end up on websites we do not want to end up on when we talk about self-play.
Well, Deb Dana talks about, she calls it home play in a lot of the polyvagal sort of trainings. And I was like, that's fun. That's so much more inviting.
It still sounds like dog training to me. I don't know why. Any of you brilliant people out there know what we should maybe start to reframe the self-work to be called.
Yeah.
I do think there would be value in it, in changing the way we speak about it, because to change the entire society's view on the word work is a little beyond what
sounds like work.
It's a bit of, that's what really would be work.
So coming in with this a little bit more practically, what does your self-work look like? I want to actually get into this a little bit too. I remember from someone on the student community had been writing about I was just having a really hard time. I was trying to get through this point of resistance. And then I just decided to get up and go dance instead. And they're like, is that okay? I'm like, yeah, that's okay. That's great. That's the best. And if they went and did something else, something they enjoyed, I'm like, that's the point of it all. But it's also what are the finer tuned moments of when we are choosing to do something out of a place of self-care and when we're doing something out of a place of avoidance because there's an effort we don't want to engage with?
Oh my goodness, that's such a great question, and honestly an entire other podcast episode.
Okay, great. We'll pocket that one.
When we talk about resistance, because that's something we deal with a lot in the student community and in the work, the mind change method, right?
Yeah.
There's resistance is something that we never see as a negative.
Right.
And but it can feel
like it.
It can feel
in
that
the
way.
moment.
Yeah. So then we kind of label it that way, and we're like, oh, I got a lot of resistance.
Maybe we should relabel that too.
I know. But then we make stories about the resistance.
Right.
Again, the same thing of maybe it's too big, maybe there's something really big in there. Maybe I'm not doing it right. There's so much reflection even in the way we handle our perception of being stuck.
Yeah.
And I think that you asked the first question, what does my self-work look like?
Yeah.
I almost hesitate to speak about it because it has been such an evolution, and I would not have wanted to skip any stage.
I appreciate that.
So
maybe you could just share a little bit about what some of those, for our listeners, what some of those earlier stages were like and a few pieces of that development. You'd started earlier about how you were like, okay, an hour a day, I'm waking up, I have special time set aside, I'm doing this thing, like I'm brave, I know what to do, here I go. And your body was like, nope.
Yep.
And then you're like, all the frustration that came with that, the helpful beliefs that you started to recognize coming up from there. And that was an opportunity to engage in a different way. But you took a different approach. What did you do?
Well, it did come honestly from that realization of like, I'm pushing myself too hard.
Yeah.
And listen, that's a story. That's an old story and an old program, pushing myself too hard. Right?
That you would do it, or that you believed that you were?
That I would do it.
Okay.
And no, I never, that's the thing. The belief was, had you asked me, I was like, I could always do better. Like there's more I could do. The story that I would tell myself in my head is, I'm not doing enough. And anyone who knew me would strongly disagree. Yeah, you've known me for many, many years. And there's still remnants of that in my daily production. And I've had to just learn more about myself and understand. I think one of the critical parts of it is the judgment piece.
Yeah.
And understanding how judgmental I was to myself first and foremost, which then of course we give out, right? We give what we have. So it really made me understand like where the judgment for others came from when I understood how judgmental I was about myself.
Yeah.
So I was judging my responses and I was labeling my responses, which gave them no space, no voice.
Yeah.
Which is very reminiscent of childhood, right?
Right.
No one's seeking to understand you.
Yeah.
They want to put a quick label on. They want to put you in a quick box so that they know what to do with you, so that you stop having whatever it is, behavior or emotion that you're having.
Yeah.
And we can say all day long, our parents and they didn't know and blah, 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 right? The fact of the matter, I was still parenting myself that way.
Right.
I was still treating myself that way. Nobody else was doing it to me now but me.
But that was the only way that you knew how to, really, at that point. That was that was how you learned to treat yourself, because that's how you'd been,
The opposite, which we do in extreme, where I had members of my family who typically were involved in addiction or various things. And we would use the words like irresponsible or lazy or, like they can't hold a job, they're unreliable, all these different things. That was my other extreme, the framework.
Right.
Well, I don't want to be that. I don't want to be that. And that was my motivating force.
Yeah.
Well, we know what happens in brain development and in the way that it continues to go. What we focus on the most is what we end up producing.
Yeah.
So I would still feel lazy, irresponsible, unproductive, even though my life was not showing that on the outside.
Right.
But some of the product of it still resulted in those efforts.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I could still look at something and go, that was totally irresponsible. Even though I worked so hard, I'm doing air quotes for people just listening, worked so hard at it. And so I was producing in alignment with the thing I said I didn't want the most.
Wait, how do you mean that you were irresponsible?
I would have the outcome of my choices would end up being, you could look at it and say, well, that was irresponsible.
But in a different way than...
In a different way than I wasn't being an addict. I wasn't being but maybe I actually invested in something or someone that anybody else would have been like,
gotcha. Okay.
Not probably the best use of your time and energy, but I worked so hard at it.
Yeah.
And the end result was still where other people could have seen, well, no, of course not. I just didn't see that. I was blinded in that way.
Okay.
Because I was still on the same trajectory. I was just going to do it different.
Yeah.
And of course, you don't think you're on that same trajectory. So I think that was a huge piece in my self-work journey.
Yeah.
is realizing that I needed to give myself more space. I needed to inquire and be more curious about my body and about my actions and about my feelings and emotions because I hadn't had a framework for that. Nobody had ever done that with me or for me.
Right. It's like it's more important than the air quotes work itself is the how are we treating ourselves through it.
Yeah. And I would say that was work.
It is.
Because I didn't know how to do it.
It's effortful.
It was effortful.
Yeah.
It was like learning another language, one that I had not engaged with much in my upbringing.
Yeah.
Is that curiosity and space for emotions, or even considering that someone had they were doing their best.
Yeah.
There was so much judgment and so much assumption that someone was just either a screw up or that someone had bad motives or that someone was actually out to get you or they weren't being honest, like all that icky kind of with it. Yeah. So I had to step back and without, again, see, this is the tricky thing, without judgment, understand that this is the way I grew up. Had I continued to judge it and be like, yeah, my parents and my family and seeing that through a judgmental lens, it would have circled me back into that same response.
Right, because you're still doing the same energy, the same process.
Yes.
Doesn't matter if it's them or if it's you, the same mechanisms are going on internally.
Yeah, you plant.
And it'll produce the same thing.
You keep planting a thorn bush seed.
Yeah.
You water it and you can want it to be roses or fruit and all day long, you're still going to get thistles, thorns. If you birth this out of judgment, if the need to change is still being motivated and driven by judgment, then, oh, my family, they were so awful and they were so this, and so I need to change. I'm still I'm still watering the same seed. Yeah. So that was the first step back. Okay. Let me not be judgmental about this. What if I'm doing really, truly the best that I can? Yeah. And what if my body's saying something really helpful and really good? Right. And let me just get it curious and inquisitive and create space. Yeah. And very quickly, which let me just give myself a little hug right here because I have not been kind to my body. I did not acknowledge its existence or live in it for so long. Yeah. And it showed right back up for me. Yeah. Like one little one little crack, and it was all there for me. I mean, I'm so amazing to me. So I stepped back just a little bit and I was like, what is this falling asleep thing? Yeah. How is this serving me? And almost instantaneously, that whole idea of rest. Yeah. Like, when are you going to give yourself a break? You've always been wanting a break, looking for a break. Like, when do you get to stop working so hard, Heather? Yeah. And then I was like, but no, this is the stuff that helped me get well, but you were never really sick or broken. Right. It was just the uncovering. And when do you get to play with some of what got uncovered? Yeah. Like, when do you get to actually hang out with this new Heather and see what she's capable of? And like love her and get to know her. Yeah. And I was like, oh, you would think that felt happy and amazing. And it just scared me a little bit. It just got me a little like, whoa, what does that mean? And am I taking the easy way out? Yeah. Am I being too easy on myself? Am I fooling myself and I just don't want to work hard? Am I just being lazy? And then I had to, step back. That's judgment. Right. Those are really judgmental things. Let me ask my body, are you just trying to avoid? Yeah. And my body's like, we work so hard. Yeah. Like, do you think we avoid work? Never do we avoid work. Like, we're working all the time. I can almost hear it be like, do you know how much work it is to just regulate your body temperature? To digest the food that you're so picky, like putting in your body and your mouth? And it was almost like, stop judging whether I'm working hard or not. I've got you. I work hard all the time. Yeah. Just let it be.
I remember there coming a point where I was doing just a lot of like deeper training and research, and I got to a point where I'm like, I can't, like, I'm getting headaches, I'm tired, and I'm like, man, like I thought that I was avoiding work, and instead it was no, this is too much. Yeah. This is just too much. I'm like, and I had to think, I'm like, okay, when I finish all of this, what do I get? Like, what's the point of all of this? What does it give me? Like, oh, well then like I have that sense of peace. I'll feel a sense of freedom. I can actually choose what I do and do not want to do. I can do really creative things. I'm like, great. Why don't I do those? Now, like we can like part of what's the point of all the work? Okay, great. And even almost like inviting that energy in, like what if I make part of that the process itself? Because that's sustainable. What if there's a way that I can engage with it where it's actually pretty peaceful? What if there's a way that I can do this that's creative? What if I know that, okay, if what I want is freedom, I can choose whether or not I actually do this. So me choosing not to engage with this and me not doing the work right now is actually more so the work than sitting here like forcing myself through.
So true.
Yeah.
And I think it just honors us better.
Yeah.
And the time of reflection through all of this, it made me think about the way that we push children in school systems now.
Yes.
And how there's no such thing really as recess anymore. And everything gets shortened. Mm-hmm. And then there's so much on the learning, right? The sitting and the learning and the doing.
In a particular kind of learning.
Yes. Hear and then regurgitate and this
performance-based.
Yeah, very performance. And then do you get the A? And I have for a long time hated that. Hated it. Yeah. I mean, so much so that my kids' evolution with school reflects a little bit about this. But I was thinking like, it's so funny how I will fight tooth and nail about that education system and try to keep my kids outside of that framework. But I do it to myself.
Yeah.
This is still the school I'm in.
I was thinking about that too and listening to a couple researchers talk, and I deeply identify with that.
Yeah, so no. And that was the beginning of, because this was before I had really ever even considered that I was going to turn this into something to help other people. I realized I needed to enjoy my life. And I kind of took a break from doing all of it. We moved overseas. This is the time in which I was like, nope, I took a big step back. I was still seeing clients. Yeah. Although at the time, I wasn't really calling them clients. I was just helping friends and family. Right. And I was still doing that because I was fascinated by the work that I was doing and by how much it was working and how it was working with everything that we would approach. And I was still really fascinated by the work. But my self-work started to look a little bit different. And honestly, that's when I started I was like, I need more people. I need more people who know this so that we can do this together. Yeah. So that I have a little bit of accountability, which I know is another curse word out there for some people. But for me, I cherish accountability when it's done from I will tell you what my standard is, and you please
reflect that back to me. The encouragement of holding to how you want to be.
And reminding me hey, remember how you said you wanted to? And how's that going? Yeah. Right? Just people asking me how do you know that? And I just craved like-minded people. Yeah. So that's where I started trying to tell more people, find the people who would know this and learn this and do this with me. Because I realized I had gotten a little bit too into my head about it. Yeah. And that's a clear sign that we're in the wrong place if we're in our head a lot about things. So that's another stage of my self-work, was a little bit of a step back. Not a step back from what we now call the mind change method. Right. Because it became the way I lived my life. It wasn't anything I was doing. Right. And I had to realize that too. Really, am I just doing mind change 1 hour a day? Or what does this mean to live it? Yeah. To adopt this as my life philosophy. And that's where I started to be like, oh, Manifesto was birthed out of that time frame. It really began in South Africa when we moved to South Africa. That's right. And I was really feeling a little directionless in a big decision that we needed to make. And I realized I need to know where I'm going. Yeah. And not the city, the town, the place, the job. Where emotionally and mentally, spiritually do I want to end up and arrive? That's the way I need to start making my decisions.
And that was different than ways you had previously done goal setting and things like that.
100%.
Yeah.
Yes, because before it was like write down the goals and the steps to get there, but it was the thing.
Right.
It was the job, the car, the amount of money. And so you're really like putting energy toward that, neglecting you in the process, neglecting me in the process, neglecting what's the most important thing, which is my development, my ability to responsibly handle those things with grace and with love and with kindness. And like I would have been the worst person in the world to give $1 million to, even if that was on my goal at the time, because I would have done things that would have brought me harm with it, that I wouldn't have seen until long term. But so all of that stuff was birthed out of, okay, there's more to what started to develop to me is the mind change method. And there's this list, this pain cure list that I came to call it, and the diving in and changing these memories and stuff is a piece.
It's a piece.
But it is not all of it, and it isn't only the work.
Yeah.
And so there needs to be more. And I started to, and I'm someone who, even though I told you to subscribe and I don't normally do that, I'm someone who actually likes to have done something personally before I'm going to tell anyone else about it.
Right.
So I thought I need to live this first. Let me engage in this. Let me just start to does gratitude really work?
Yes.
I was like, because I had done so many stinking
much.
journals.
Right.
That have like 5 entries in it. And then it's like, so I'm just never have been a journaler.
Yeah.
And so I had to figure out a way that this actually worked.
Yeah.
And the safe haven was a huge piece for me, because in the beginning, in the work that I did with the EFT-based stuff, it was like find a happy memory. And I faked that for so long that I had a happy memory. I faked it because I didn't think I had any happy memories.
Yeah.
That really, I think, impeded so much of how much work I was able to do, how far I was able to take myself.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't finding a place where my body could feel safe. And it's very difficult to push through really deep stuff if safety isn't your arrival.
You just can't.
I made a lot of big changes.
Yeah.
And then I had to evolve. Otherwise, I was going to get really stuck.
I remember when I started earlier on and I was doing a bit of a training, I was considering whether or not to go a little bit deeper with it. And I talked to you with some advice and you're like, honestly, like, get to about this level, like learn how to do some of the basic stuff for yourself, but then go live your life. You're like, I see people just kind of circle around sometimes. You're like, go live your life. And then if you want to come back to it, do. And that's what I did. And the time, I find it's the time off that has been is often the most fruitful because at the time the focus had been just working through the focused individual stuff from the past kind of things, as opposed to like, no, fill your life with all of the good things, practice that. And then naturally the things that you need to work on come up and you have ways of dealing with it bit by bit. And sometimes when I say bit by bit, I mean like they happen in the layers that they need to and that you're ready for. And the more you practice that sense of safety, the safer you are, the safer it is to experience that, right? Because even the familiarity of it is one of those indications, and it allows you to go deeper. But sometimes going really deep can also be really light now because there's such a strong foundation.
That's so true.
Yeah.
A great example of that is where I landed upon my sexual trauma.
Yeah.
Which had this beautiful opportunity to just arise.
Yeah.
Which I had no previous memory of having been, having any sexual trauma. I exhibited a lot of the traditional behaviors, but didn't have a memory of it. And so I just kept saying, no, nothing ever happened to me. And through the space that got created, through my being very loving with myself over time, and it's been a journey, and it's still something that I, work with, that memory popped up. And it was not devastating at all. I was like, oh, there you are.
Yeah.
I thought you might be there somewhere, right? And it just came up, and I was able to just approach it with such love and grace and make the changes. And it's like, it doesn't bother me. it never actually bothered me.
Right.
It never bothered me.
No sense of attachment, no sense of identity. It wasn't a big, it was just.
It came up.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, hey, you want to change? You must. You're here. Let's do this.
Yeah.
And then it went away. And it's not something that I only say it for relatability purposes, you know, so that people understand that's something that I had personal experience changing.
But also I think because that's not, especially with, you know, sexual trauma, that's not how we hear it talked about very often. So even just knowing that that's a possibility opens the door for people.
Yes, because I think there's a bit of a stigma around it being like, if you find this out, girl, prepare for 40 years of therapy, right? And then still go ahead, do your 40 years of therapy, and you're still gonna just be able to cope around it as long as you stay away from any triggers, you know. And it's just something that is not. It's not. It. Yeah. I have nothing with it anymore. But love for me, like I just actually, this is interesting that I'm bringing this up now. I just replayed the memory the other day as it now is in my mind, and it brought me so much joy. I know that a lot of you don't understand what I'm saying yet, or think that there's even a construct of this, but there is. And it brings me so much joy. Yeah. And anyway, that's the power. But I couldn't have gotten there had I not done the journey of it.
Right. You can't skip steps too, because it's really different than positive thinking or bypassing or this shouldn't bother me. It doesn't bother me. Great. Well, it didn't bother them, so it doesn't. Like it's a really different process of engaging. But
or I'm just going to do a cognitive reframe.
Right.
Go ahead. Consciously, you can say it and change it although you want in your mind. Yeah. Consciously, if your subconscious mind still has that wiring, that's what's going to come out. It's just going to come out somehow, some way, somewhere, at some point. Yeah. And that's why we do the work we do.
Yeah. And it's also part of why I think there is this really appreciation for why there's no need for judgment, because it's just input, output. Yeah. You're like, oh, okay, great. More information, and we can sort through it. We can, you know. Yes. Help bring it down.
This whole topic was birthed because I was telling you that I came across a reel.
Oh, yes.
Where it was such a beautiful thing. This one was out spinning in the wildflowers, and the top caption read, self-help people, personal development people, and trauma people aren't going to like this. And I was like, okay, interesting. You know, good job on that little title there, because I watched. And then she said that really basically what we wouldn't like to hear is that sometimes people need a break from the work. She said over time, she started to feel even more sick and even more, you know, like frustrated that I think she was kind of in one of those things too, that you rehearse it a little bit. Yeah. I'm not sure what she was doing, because she was talking about journaling it and, you know, over and over and over again.
We get into the trance of it a bit.
Yeah. And I thought, and I watched the whole thing and I thought, no, girl, I'm right there with you. Yeah. I'm one of those people that you're talking to, and I agree 100%. So come our way if you want to, you know. So that's really what this is birthed out of, is to say we do talk a lot about the work. At some point would love to change the way that we talk about that in and of itself. Sure. But that it doesn't feel like work.
And when it does, for me, that's feedback of, oh, great, there's an adjustment to be made.
Yeah. And that's okay.
Yeah.
And there's even with that of like, how do I sort of thinking about that reparenting that child again? Yeah. Like, how would I want to approach a child that's a little frustrated and feels a little stuck? Yeah. Am I going to just keep working at it, you know, like just try again with this kind of, or would I be like, let's just go play?
I did this last night.
Okay.
So we were getting ready to do the podcast, and I was like, what should I do to prepare? I'm like, should I read over some stuff so I have it fresh on my mind? I'm like, you know what, we've talked. We laid out a couple notes of a few points. I think I'm going to go dancing. So I went dancing with some friends. I learned how to two-step, and I'm like, oh, much better. That's what I needed to do.
Yeah, I danced last night too.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it's such a key piece of it. I think what I'd like to sort of wrap up and leave us with is, if you are someone who recognizes that you have some work to do, or maybe you're not exactly where you want to be, or maybe you love where you're at and you're just like, and I'd still like to level up again. There is a component of this where you have to be enjoying. You have to find some place to be gentle and playful and creative and inquisitive. And I think that would have been hard for me to hear in the depth of my chronic illness, but I think it's still what I needed to hear then.
Yeah.
At least that seed needed to be planted. Because if we wait, if we think that we're only going to be free, happy, peaceful when this thing is done, it's never done. Yeah. We're not the thing. We're not broken, so we don't need fixing.
Right.
There's so much in there, and there's so much that still needs to be heard.
Yeah.
From us to us, that and I never want to stop listening, and I never want to stop growing and learning and engaging and being curious about me and letting that little me explore and do all the things, right? Yeah. So I think that that's what we want to communicate is, if the work is feeling like work and it's feeling frustrating and you're feeling like it's not working anymore, or you're feeling like, you want to throw your hands up, take a step back.
Yeah.
Just find something that brings light to your soul, something that just makes you smile. Anything. Take a walk in nature, get into nature, do some breathing. That's part of it too.
Yeah.
Self-care is not just diving in fact, it's such a small little sliver of it.
Yeah.
And so just be able to reframe that and give yourself a little bit of space.
Love that.
So the work doesn't have to feel like work. Yeah. So we agree. Instagram, reel maker, whoever you are out there, and to all of you out there who either do the mind change method or are interested in it, it's part of, we're still learning, we're still growing, we're still being informed, and we are still playing with this whole thing. We're playing
with this.
Yeah. And that's not only okay, it's necessary.
I agree.
So thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And come see us again, the Mind Change Podcast. Like, subscribe, download. We're also on YouTube if you're someone that's just listening. And if you're watching us on YouTube, we also are on all the podcast platforms. And so we look forward to seeing you next time.
Until next time.
Changing the world, one mind at a time.